Good morning and welcome to this virtual event, which is brought to you by Capital West London and in partnership with WSP. Capital West London is a partnership programme between the 7 combined West London authorities: Barnet, Brent, Ealing, Hammersmith and Fulham, Harrow, Hillingdon and Hounslow, and has been running for the past 3 years promoting inward investment and the combined West London offer. We are here today to talk about delivering sustainability in West London logistics, and thank you all so much for joining us. It's really great to have such a big audience coming in this morning. If you've got any questions for our panel during the session, please put them in the Q&A. Our wonderful chair, Paul Norman, will be monitoring those and we'll try and get to as many as possible. But if we don't manage to cover them all, then we'll be very happy to follow up with you after the session. So please ask as many questions as you like and we'll aim to cover them with you either now or soon after the event. If you've got any questions for us during the session as well, you can just about logistics or Capital West London in general, maybe put them in the chat just so they don't distract from the session, and we'll be happy to answer them too. And I'm now really pleased to hand over to Paul Norman, who is the editor at CoStar and the chair for this panel. So please enjoy, everyone, and over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hi all, my name is Paul Norman. Yes, I'm the managing editor of CoStar News, the UK's most read commercial real estate daily bulletin. I'm delighted to be moderating this discussion. COVID-19 has only accelerated growth in e-fulfillment. 2020 saw online spending rise to a record high. Fallen back a little, I think, but in West London, traditionally the most expensive place to rent industrial in the UK, that's bringing increases in demand for industrial land and a need for further innovation in last mile delivery, as well as massive opportunities for local investment and employment. We have an expert panel today to discuss how the sector is changing and what lies ahead. How can the public and private sector work together to innovate? And crucially, what's being done to achieve targets around sustainability? I'm going to first ask each of our panelists a question by way of introduction, and then we'll discuss some further topics, some of these topics. And there'll be a chance, as Bonnie said, to send in questions, which I'll endeavour to get to. And the panelists also will be able to respond to these afterwards as well. So without further ado, Chris Douglas is Technical Director, Freight Transport at the Engineering Planning Consultant WSP. Welcome, Chris. How has COVID-19 had an impact on the freight and logistics sector in West London? And how will the increasing focus on sustainability continue to impact the sector's future?
Thanks, Paul, and thanks for the invite to sit on the panel. I mean, it's been a crazy year, really, hasn't it? It's just over 12 months ago, 50% of the UK heavy goods vehicle fleet, HGV fleet, was parked up due to restrictions. Around about September time of last year, that came back up to previous or pre-COVID levels, but related to January. But that was a huge impact that it had on freight transport and transport industry. That hit the headlines, which I think was a good thing, because it meant that the freight industry and logistics were seen a bit more visibility by the general public, and we're also seen as a bit of an unsung hero, not quite in the same league as the NHS, but recognition for an industry that usually sits way back in the background. I think what COVID did was exacerbate aspects or trends that we'd already identified and we'd already seen. And what I mean by that is obviously the growth in online retail and corresponding growth in parcel traffic and home delivery, and the changing role of the high street are all directly as a result of online retail. And there was linked to that then the inevitable growth in van traffic in central urban areas, sort of 50% growth between 2009 and 2021. And that's been as a combination of construction and online retail. I think what that does is present a real challenge in terms of managing vans in urban areas, but it also then presents an opportunity for innovative alternatives. It's been a really tough time for local communities and local businesses. I think the London boroughs carried out some really positive, really excellent initiatives, and maybe some negatives as well. I think whenever the emergency measures were introduced for pedestrians and cyclists, there was a lack of consideration of the need for urban freight management and delivery by vans and goods vehicles through the front doors of premises. That, to me, was a concern because it kind of demonstrated just how urban freight management wasn't really considered within that process. And I think that isn't just COVID related. I think that is very much the case in standard policy and planning within local authorities across the country. Boroughs also did some really innovative things. I think a number of boroughs in West London set up their own e-cargo bike services to make sure that local businesses could distribute to local communities and other local businesses as well. So that was real taking the initiative by the boroughs, and that happened in Ealing, Hammersmith and Fulham and others. I think extra volumes in terms of urban delivery and particularly home delivery have pushed industry to look at different ways of operating themselves and to figure out how they can make best use of a last mile, first mile solution. But a last mile, first mile solution also requires land and premises. And I think there is a real growing demand for premises in urban centres that we really need to address. Outcomes from all of that is that there needs to be real partnerships between public sector and private sector, between boroughs and industry, to try to find solutions to those urban freight management issues. And I think urban freight management strategies and action plans are the way forward. In the west of London, the most recent freight strategy is about 5 and a bit years old. And I think, we need to press the button on that and review post-COVID if we ever get to that point, and also look at much better quality data and better planning tools to be able to better manage urban freight activity. So I think COVID, in a nutshell, shone a light on the industry and just how important it is. And I think we should try to continue to build on all of that, work in partnership and put in place decent strategies and action plans that fully consider the needs of the movement of goods and services as well as people. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Chris. Well, there's a huge amount to pick up on there, obviously, as we go forward. And Alison, you'll be thinking a lot about that, or many of those issues. So Alison Bradshaw, West Area Manager of Transport for London. How is TfL reviewing its strategies in West London in the wake of COVID-19 in regards to freight and logistics?
Well, yeah, I think a lot of the elements that Chris picked up, he talks about it being accelerated, and I think we are definitely looking at it in an accelerated timescale. A lot of what we're doing in terms of supporting delivery and servicing activity sort of was set out in 2019 in our action plan, which is online, and it's got a lot of commitments that TfL has made on there to things that we'll deliver. One element of that I was working on, and which we published in December, is the delivery and servicing guidance, which for my area, and we talk about sort of what I'm focusing is actually building in the land for the delivery and servicing. So initially, sort of ideally, it will be on a brand new build, but the guidance that we've published online can help anybody retrofitting, particularly in this time where we've got changes to planning. So you might see some changes of land use there. You might see some changes of occupiers. So there's some really good tools in there that people can use. And Chris talked about sort of a collaboration and people working together, and we hope that we've sort of put online some tools for people to use. I know sort of coming more recently, so that was in December, we've got the mayoral pledge, which Sadiq put in to help businesses for the freight and logistics, which we continue to, that gives us permission to continue this work. And I know the team is reviewing their priorities right at this moment because of his re-election. So hopefully we can continue to do that. One thing I would want to just point out is the Healthy Street Fund for businesses. I know it's been really successful in Hammersmith. Hammersmith Bid put in some e-cargo bikes for their local for the local businesses. That is still ongoing. The fund is in question at the moment because TfL's financial situation, but we're still here for advice. That's one thing I wanted to highlight.
Okay, thank you. And one thing maybe we can touch on at some stage is yesterday, obviously, the Queen's Speech planning bill commitment from the government. Just was going to ask at some stage, maybe in the back of mind, how much that has thought about these things, central government, and whether it's front of centre enough. Anyway, we'll move on to Oliver Crawn now, Head of Corporate Social Responsibility at DPD, doing all the delivering. So how have companies such as DPD adapted to increased demand while maintaining a focus on sustainability targets?
Thank you, Paul. Well, DPD pre-COVID changed a 12-year strategy that we had and included a fourth pillar. And that fourth pillar was to be the UK's leader in sustainable delivery. And by doing that, you're ingraining it in the everyday working of every department. So it's not just my department in CSR that focuses on sustainability. Every department looks at it, and it has the buy-in, so top down to everyone and through engagement. So for me, to ensure that everyone's still focused on sustainability through huge growth. Last year, DPD saw about 18 months worth of growth in 3 months because of the lockdown and people needing to order online. And that still continues the momentum. You know, we set out last year to achieve 10% EV in every depot across the UK. So not just in London. You know, there's more challenging areas with range of vehicles across the UK to obviously achieve that, but we did that by July, actually. Sadly, last year we did have to order some more diesel final mile delivery vehicles just due to the volume increase in the COVID period, but we still maintain that 10% and that focus. So with that, we went from 149 vehicles at the start of the year, electric vehicles, to 732 by the end of the year. And by the end of this year, we'll have 1,700. So we're really pushing the electrification of fleet in London, especially. We will be delivering all of Westminster Borough, or majority of it, by the end of the year, fully electric. It's part of our Vision 25 strategy. So we have a company strategy to deliver fully electric by 2025, 25 towns, cities across the UK, London obviously being number one due to the population size. And that will deliver 100 million parcels a year, zero emissions.
And just to ask, is that a common thread amongst your, not that we should mention them clearly, but your peers and rivals, or are you way ahead of the curve?
I would like to say we're way ahead of the curve, Paul. It depends on, look, everyone's making a difference. We do look at our competitors, but we're way ahead of the pack. People have different challenges in the way they model their business and their sort of staffing levels. But look, we're fully focused doing the right thing. It's not a PR stunt. These vehicles are very expensive. There's some savings in fueling them, but just to put it in perspective, a 3.5-ton diesel vehicle costs about £25,000, an electrical equivalent £42,000. But it's not just about vans. We have a very, very small fleet of e-cargo bikes that are based in London, one in York, and we're looking at obviously other alternatives as well as vans. But it's important that it's zero emissions. And just to finish off on that, it's not just about vans, it's about renewables. We have renewable energy in every single site. We have over 15,000 solar panels in our business, giving back to the grid when we're not using power. And we also launched an air quality monitoring system using our fleet in London last August, and it's now in Birmingham, Cardiff, and it's taking readings of PM 2.5 every 12 seconds, every sensor is, and we have 100 sensors in London, mobile, fitted to our vehicles, and 20 at our pickup locations. And that's another part of our strategy, is expanding our pickup network, so we can deliver in multiple parcels, and people, especially in London, can walk to that destination and pick up their parcel, minimizing travel in a car or a van, you know. So there's that. And the importance of pushing this strategy is engagement with our service providers, our stakeholders, you know, and our staff, ensuring that is fully focused. It's the right thing to do.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll come back to a lot of that as well. Now moving to Oliver Bycroft, Capital Deployment and Leasing Vice President at Prologis. Clearly the industrial development giant is building the space for the likes of DPD. What are Prologis's predictions for West London's logistics sectors and its ambitions in this area? And how do these visions for the future link to sustainability, Oliver?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, look, the industrial and logistics sector has always been and made a huge contribution to the West London economy. It's always been a really strong component, and as has already been alluded to, the sector was experiencing strong growth prior to the pandemic, And since then, it has really accelerated and played a critical role in actually keeping the country going over that period. So, you know, I think that going forward, you know, we really expect the sector to continue to go from strength to strength and actually play an important role in absorbing some of the sectors that have been less fortunate and where they're experiencing, you know, potentially high levels of unemployment. So, you know, I think overall it will continue to make a really strong contribution. You know, we for a long time have been talking about, you know, the types of jobs and trying to sort of dispel some of the myths around that. You know, the average wage in the logistics sector is higher than the national average. You know, when you look at the breakdown of jobs within these businesses, you know, on average, only about 50% are the warehouse sort of operatives. And of course, you know, these are businesses. You have managerial staff, you have sales staff, you have accounting, finance functions. So there is a diversity of jobs, and as the sector gets more sophisticated and automated, there's increasingly need for IT and engineer and highly skilled individuals in those areas. In terms of Prologis' ambitions, you know, we've been investing in West London for 20 years, and you know, our appetite really does remain undiminished. If anything, we'd like to accelerate our investment, and that there really is, you know, probably no capital ceiling. That the constraint will be the availability of land on which to develop, I'm sure. And just to briefly pick up on your final point there on sustainability, and I think Ollie made some great comments there. But I think at the risk of stating the obvious, you know, I think logistics is absolutely critical to, you know, to our economy and to our national infrastructure. And as I say, during COVID, you know, I think even when there was just slight shortages of products on shelves, it showed the mild hysteria that set in, and I think that was really helpful. Shining light. People understand that stuff has to get made, and people understand the point of purchase, retail. But I think often for the person on the street, they don't see the bit in between, which is the flow of goods in building that product and getting it to the point of sale. And so, you know, I think sometimes people can look at the sector and go, yeah, there's lots of vehicle movements, lots of HGVs, lots of road transport. You know, that's not very sustainable. Do we really need that? And I think the answer is absolutely yes, we do need it. You know, at the moment there is no alternative. But there are a couple of ways, you know, in which we can improve. And I think, you know, as Ollie articulated very well, logistics businesses are very concerned about doing the right thing. But the comforting thing is that is also aligned to very good commercial sense, because the two ways to be most efficient is to put facilities in a network that is best located to serve the population. So having a facility in the right place reduces the number of miles on the road. And secondly, it is investment in low carbon technology, electrification. But, you know, both of those things reduce, you know, transport is the biggest cost typically for logistics operators, and petrol is a huge part of that. So, you know, the commercial and the ethical interests of these businesses are aligned on sustainability.
Thank you very much. And of course, looking behind you where you are now, you're in a pretty green looking industrial development in West London, I believe. Yes, yes. You know, through what is the ingenuity of modern technology, I'm not actually there. That is a backdrop, Paul, but really? Yes, this is one of our schemes in West London. Yeah, amazing. So it looks very nice there. So anyway, but, yeah, there is also a big push on making these places better places to work, better environments. You know, I think it has more and more amenity and all the rest of it. But maybe you know, I think the sector has perhaps you know, fallen short in the past when you look at some legacy old industrial areas. But you know, that's really changing, and what's behind me is the future of logistics. Yeah, it doesn't look like Park Royal to me. Is it all? I think, but anyway. So moving over to Sarah Scannell, Assistant Director of Planning and Development at the London Borough of Hounslow. Could you give us a short introduction to Hounslow's strategy, both as regards to the industrial sector and the sustainability agenda? How can the public sector work with you, Ollie and DPD and so forth to deliver sustainable logistics in West London?
Yes, thank you. So I just a bit of background for me. I cover the planning side, but I also cover the business engagement and economic side of stuff as well. So I think I'll just touch on some of those things from a Hounslow perspective. carrying on pretty much from where Oliver left off, one of the key things that we do in Hounslow is we set the planning policy, we set the framework against which things will be located. And there's a big part of our current, we've got a local plan review that's focused on the west of the borough. And that is where we've got our logistics, where we've got our big industrial spaces and lots of our logistics. Hounslow is very proud of its extremely dense network of logistics and its location, and helping to provide that much needed logistics space for within West London, particularly related to Heathrow, but obviously because of its network as well. We have in that plan that's coming out, it's about to be published. It was developed in pre-COVID times. It's got it's got a map of where we want to increase the space for logistics operations, and then looking to the new world of like how that might be co-located, how those spaces might be created, and exactly as Oliver said, what do they look like to offer something back to the environment that's not these big grey sheds on the motorways. So that's in terms of what we're doing in terms of big strategy. We're trying to get more space basically to provide the really important basis for which to make logistics happen in West London. Secondly, just moving on from that, in terms of recovery, obviously things dramatically changed, as everyone has said, over COVID times. What we've identified in Hounslow is that the logistics sector, oh God, sorry, I've got an airport very close to me. The logistics sector is really important in recovery. So what have we done? We've looked at our green recovery strategy. How do we make it as sustainable as possible? And touching on what others have said as well, that last mile, we've got in our green recovery strategy mobility demonstrators. That one of those projects is looking at that last mile delivery. That, coupled with our work on town centre vision documents and looking at our ownership in town centres, can really unlock some of this last mile things that people have been talking about. The council has the space, it has some space, it also has the power to negotiate with the developers or the owners of land that might not be working as it is in the new world of town centres, and putting that together in a kind of green recovery sustainability strategy could really work to kind of deliver some of those real last mile delivery options that people have been talking about for quite some time now. And then moving on, just wanted to touch on what I don't want to run over time, but we've got we've got some summer sessions basically. So we've got some really big players here, which is great on the call. We also know that there's some really quite small and interesting businesses that are looking to expand and change, and we are as a council wanting to support everyone that we can. So we've got some summer sessions of business engagement, and one of those is about looking at how the logistics, smaller businesses can green their business, how they can upskill so that they can enter the market in some of these green ways, so that they're not beholden to some of their old basically standards, and opening their kind of business plans and opportunities to some of these new technologies on the market, and offering the pairing of the training to kind of get them best placed to deliver that in the future. So that's a very quick summary of what Hounslow is doing and how people can engage if that's something that would be interesting to them.
Well, I'm sure it would be, and I'm seeing already quite a lot of questions coming in, which I'll get to. I just wanted to start with a couple of broad questions for the panel before trying to come to some of them. So let's just see what innovations are going to take place in the sector. We've already sort of touched on electrification clearly, but it'd be great to, over the next 5 years, what are we going to see? And that can be anything from electrification to the buildings themselves. And I'd come to Chris first to ask about that at WSP.
Yeah, I think we always get a bit carried away with sort of innovation, meaning new technology, and I think that's right to some degree. I think there's really good examples of that, cargo bikes moving into e-assist cargo bikes being put into service. You got sort of tomorrow's world droids and drones, which always end up being flagged as sort of future urban logistics solutions. And, there's no one single element. I've never done a freight strategy or a freight action plan that comprised just one single measure. It's always a package of things. So I think it's not just innovation in terms of the method of delivery, the technological method. It's also about having better quality data collected by more innovative tech savvy solutions, so that it's more real world data to understand the exact nature of freight movement in urban areas, which is something that's quite lacking. And also then the planning tools that will go to support that. So picking up on a point that Oliver Bycroft made about, you know, proper location, good locations to minimize STEM journeys, STEM trips, wasted mileage, and then trying to capture as large a catchment area as possible. So I think good quality data and really sophisticated planning tools are as important innovations, I think, as sort of droids and drones.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, coming to Oliver as well, now I've actually had a question through from Paul Jackson that might feed into some of the things you might say about this. He says, can Oliver B say something about the opportunity to build higher multi-story given ongoing land constraints? Are planners supportive of this? So yeah, just to ask you about innovations going forward, and I guess that's one that is critical in the development world.
Yeah, so it's definitely something that's been in focus within our sector now for a number of years. You know, it's a difficult nut to crack. I mean, you know, in terms of the efficiency of land use, you know, it does make perfect sense that, you know, every other sector builds up apart from probably industrial and logistics. And, you know, there are precedents elsewhere across the world, you know, Japan, examples in the US, where people are doing this and Prologis are doing it. So we've been working hard to try and apply those principles to the UK. There are some, you know, there are some challenges. You know, industrial logistics has impacts already on the highway network, on visual impact and all those sorts of things. And while overall London plan policy is supportive of intensification of use and going up, you know, if you start looking at, you know, transport modelling, for example, on the industrial logistics side, and then apply a factor of 4 because you've got 4 stories, and then availability of power and the fact that you are 4 times higher, those buildings, and that there are some very, you know, specific planning considerations that need to be overcome, which does limit, and also just the nature of limited land supply. You know, we think you need, you know, quite big rectangular sites because the highway is next to dual carriageway. So I think once you tick off all those criteria to get a suitable multi-story site, you are probably down to, you know, and that's what we've been struggling with actually. With finding the appropriate sites in the right location where we can deliver these things without creating, you know, impacts that are unacceptable to the planning system.
Okay, and then on the wider question on sort of the innovation that we're going to see, is there, you know, things you're particularly excited about?
Is that one back to me, Paul? Sorry.
Yes, well, just so I come back to you because I didn't give you the chance to answer that bit. I was straight on to multi-story.
No problem. I think there are lots of things. I think, you know, I would just echo, I think Ollie's comments on electrification. You know, DPD are leading, but there's a number of others as well. I think particularly those that use those, you know, that rely heavily on, you know, that use a lot of vans, with a focus on London. You know, I think, you know, when you think about the adoption of electric vehicles within this sector compared to the wider population, you know, I think within the next 5 years, you will see probably most, you know, trying at least to adopt it. And actually the constraints are probably not the will to do so, but one, the production of these vehicles, and the availability of power, which is another subject that I won't get into, but we have a very responsive approach to providing additional power, and I think that actually needs to change more generally with the electrification of all vehicles across the UK.
Okay. Now, Sarah, I just asked as well. You mentioned you sort of big skies thinking a lot here about what's happening going forward as well in Hounslow. What innovations in particular would you expect to see?
I think, you know, the planning sector as a whole has been grappling with kind of the spatial question for quite some time, and I don't think that we're in a place where we've got the answer yet. So I think there's definitely work to do on how we can best make use of land and Oliver's touched on, that challenges that the policies are set up to do innovative ways of setting land out, but the reality of that is yet to really be kind of demonstrated to work. I think the key thing is, in this new kind of post-COVID world, is the collaboration, which will be so important. And I think there is all the stuff that everyone said about making sure there's power, making sure that the tech is there, but actually making sure that the space is there and making sure that we're making the best use of the resources that we have, I think will be partly quick wins, but partly the key to unlocking long-term planning for how best to make it work on a spatial level.
Okay. And at TfL, Alison, is there anything particularly exciting you there about the next 5 years?
Well, it was interesting. We talk about drones and electric vehicles and things. One thing that I picked up in the Mayor's manifesto pledge was that he mentioned the sort of greener last mile, but also rail freight. And I know TfL have been working really closely with Network Rail, and they're going to release a strategy, I think, this summer, looking at that. So a lot of the time we look to the future, but actually some of the stuff we used to use in the past, we need to maximise, like rail and river, canals, what have you. So yeah, I think in terms of TfL, just an added element would be maximising what we've already got, as well as embracing some of the drones and etc., the new technology which is coming forward.
Okay, and yeah, I'll come to you, Ollie, as well now. Finally, Ollie Crawn, just to ask this question. Obviously, you're thinking a lot about innovation in terms of delivery.
Yeah, obviously I touched on electrification. We're very focused on EV, not plug-in hybrid or anything in between. I'd hope to see a lot more vehicles and the price come down and the availability. The first 100 3.5 ton electric vans that we ordered were actually only manufactured left-hand drive and had to be shipped over to the UK and altered right-hand drive. So there's those challenges. Hydrogen would be interesting to see if that moves forward. I think Alison has touched on a great point with utilising networks that we already have. So, potentially canals, but then it's speed and convenience and how do we get around those. I think bikes play a big part, but will that then become an issue when you've got loads of cargo bikes zooming around and clogging up bikeways? And I think, again, Chris has said, there's not one solution, there's multiple solutions. I think innovation in all of those aspects is key. Buildings, definitely. Our Westminster all-electric site in London is our most expensive per square foot. It doesn't attract people to opening up micro sites with that, and there's a complexity in the operation as well, because you're feeding into a site outside of London or close to the sort of circular, and then again moving it to somewhere closer inside London, and it adds layers. But we also opened our Q Park on Park Lane microsite after 18 months of arduous legal wrangling to get it over the line. So I think innovation and also partnership is essential to really move this forward. And everything should be kept on the table. Just because it doesn't quite work right now, it might work in 12 months, 24 months. That might be the time for it.
Okay, now a lot of the questions that are coming in are kind of based around the next topic I was going to go onto. So I'm going to sort of feed them in while I'm asking this. Basically, what opportunities to address climate change does the industrial sector offer is the question. And I might come straight back to you there, Ollie. One of the other questions that's been asked here is, are you able to source 100% green energy for your fleet? And is there a risk that green energy supply doesn't keep up with demand? So that's one question specifically for you, but I'm going to ask all of the panel about how the industrial sector can actually help address climate change issues.
Sorry, Paul. Since 2019, all of our sites are guaranteed renewable electricity. It's a contract that we have with an energy supplier. We have a lot of what we call owner drivers, so service providers, the best in the business. They are amazing. They're our brand ambassadors. We have gone out to pay for home charger where possible. Obviously, there's the OZEV grant of £350, and then we pay £350 for the charger as well. Typically, they don't have to pay anything towards it. However, London, not a lot of drivers have off-street parking to have that and utilise that. So we can't guarantee that these drivers obviously utilise renewable energy. So, you know, we do offer them to change. You know, there's a staff ODF discount where you can switch energy providers for a favourable rate to guarantee renewable energy in your own home. So if they're charging at home, they would also get renewable energy if they'd selected that provider. But we can't guarantee that off-site people are 100%. And also there's people that charge publicly. You know, it depends where they receive their electricity as well.
Okay, but on the wider issue of how it can kind of address the issues around climate change, the industrial sector obviously has a huge part to play in that, I guess.
Yeah, of course. You know, we're really pushing forward. I think you can see the focus and the momentum in business. Our customers wanting to understand what we are doing about it. Their consumers, you know, wanting to be more responsible and understand, you know, how does their item, like Oliver said, you know, get manufactured, shipped, you know, and arrive at their door. People are becoming so conscious about, you know, their buying and their purchasing. Look, it's the defining decade, and you can see that people are really changing focus, and that will drive change. And the industry is changing. I know for a fact we are, and our competitors are making efforts to reduce their emissions as well.
Yeah, and obviously, Alison, coming to you there, maybe with Transport for London, you've got a huge role to play in this as well, ensuring that happens across the sector. Yeah, totally. And I think we mentioned before about collaboration. I think that's just what we've got to do. So TfL has got sort of the tools and which is trying to help others implement some of these greener aspects. But we've just got to work together and listen and use some of the tools. And if there's anything that's missing, we need to investigate and sort of help get it out there and put whatever's needed in. Okay. Well, I'll come to Oliver now as well for Prologis, just about this topic. There's a couple of questions probably directed at Prologis in particular here. Can you expand on how you're supporting your tenants in transitioning to net zero? Are you looking for opportunities to utilise roof space on your warehouses for solar generation? If so, would be great to catch up, is from Andrew Dakers. And equally, I think there's another question here. Will competitor industrial landowners need to start cooperating where there are adjacent sites to deliver low carbon heating and electricity networks seeing multiple sites? I just thought I'd place them into context of this question around sustainability and what the industrial sector is doing and can do to improve the climate change problems. Yeah, thanks. There's a few there, and actually I was just going to pick up on one of the, you know, sort of some of Ollie's points actually before we go on, which actually I think when you look at our sector, and particularly e-commerce and last mile, I think another important thing to remember is that is actually replacing other journeys and other processes. Yeah. So, you know, we've commissioned some research carried out in the US by MIT, obviously a US organization, but used global data, which compared the carbon footprint of e-commerce with traditional bricks and mortar shopping. And what that showed was that on average, e-commerce has a carbon footprint 36% below that of bricks and mortar retail, and most of those savings are in transport. And the logic behind that is quite straightforward in our view, that a single van can go and do up to 100 deliveries with some clever, sophisticated technology that makes sure that those routes are planned in a really efficient way. The vans are full, and that would be compared to 100 individual trips to the shops in a car. Yeah. So I think the starting point is the shift offline, and sometimes we lose sight of this. Is a net benefit in our opinion, and that's supported by the research. Just to pick up some of the other then questions in terms of, you know, perhaps more from a development property perspective. Yeah. You know,
I think like many other businesses and sectors, you know, we've undergone a massive sea change in mindset in recent years, and it just feels like the momentum on that is growing. I mean, actually, you know, Prologis have been actually building carbon neutral buildings for 10 years now, but it's reached the point, and you know, much like, as I say, I'll even say, you know, we do that because we all believe that we have a shared responsibility to tackle climate change. That's the first thing, but it is also no longer an option not to do it, because, you know, the institutional money, global money that now comes in to often fund the sector, even the US, you know, we're a US REIT, so we have investors, and their requirements every year get more and more stringent on what are you doing on sustainability and to tackle climate change. And on the other end, we've got the customers as well that also are demanding more and more. You know, they want sustainable buildings. So that's what we try to do. We try to create buildings that are really sustainable, not only in the way we construct them, but then operationally going forward helps our customers operate in a low carbon way. Sorry, on the roof space, I'll try to be quick. So
yeah,
on the roof
please.
space, we already provide, you know, as standard on a speculative building, we provide 10% PV. We actually find, you know, in a logistics building, most of it is warehouse, and we have 15% roof lights, which basically mean on a gloomy day, you don't need the lights on. So actually, the trick we have with PV is that actually it really just powers the offices, and 10% is about enough to power the offices during the day. What we've found is if we want to go above that, you're looking at exporting it into the grid. And again, we've come against issues, because at the moment, to have lots of separate connections back into the grid, as I understand it, can create problems for the way that basically our grid and electricity network is set up. So I think that's, you know, there is massive potential there, because our roof space is massive, and if we can, I'm sure it will be an issue that is solvable and will be solved to make more efficient use of that.
Great. And Sarah, coming to you there, obviously it sounds like you might be next to an airport, but obviously you've got a huge airport with maybe a new runway coming at some time in the next you know, many years. I don't know. But what do you do at Hounslow as well to kind of help and stipulate and make sure that, you know, sustainability is front of mind for the industrial sector?
So yeah, I mean, there is standard planning policy that you're talking about, that all the things that we've already talked about, that, you know, PVs. One of the things through the climate change action plans that lots of authorities are dealing with at the moment. Climate change action plans. What does that mean? How are the councils going to get to, like, not net zero, but actual zero carbon? Hugely ambitious plans. One of the things in Hounslow that we're looking at is mapping networks of energy networks. So as Oliver pointed out, that there's a real challenge in how you have these individual sites that are kind of trying to feed back to the grid, and it does create logistical problems in that sense. So what Hounslow are trying to do is look at the whole borough, and obviously the beyond, to map where might be good locations for these energy networks, and trying to put the infrastructure in where possible, so that the people can connect, and that there's a more coordinated approach to providing energy. It's very simple to say and quite challenging to do, but going back to some of the other themes we've talked about today, the kind of collaboration work will be really important to get things like that off the ground. But there's real impetus, particularly on that energy and the connection and decarbonising the network in that way, that the council can kind of facilitate working through different landowners.
All right. Thank you. And Chris, finally coming to you, you're obviously thinking a lot about all of these issues to do with sustainability. You know, what are the key opportunities, I guess?
So just in terms of the sector and the operators within the sector, I think, you know, having been involved in operational efficiency best practice programs for the last 20 odd years, industry does quite a lot already, you know, and the reason for that is that from an operational point of view, this all comes back to fuel consumption and vehicle emissions, and fuel or energy costs money, and it makes sound financial sense, commercial sense to try to minimize that cost, given it's such a high percentage in overall fleet operating costs. I think industry needs to keep continuing to do that and look for innovative ways of trying to minimize total trips moved and optimize those trips that are undertaken and use the most efficient, most clean vehicles to do it. I think Ollie's point about as consumers, we're starting to think a bit more about the way that we behave is absolutely right, but I do think there's still a long way to go in terms of rationalizing trip generation, because I think, you know, the industry that I'm focused on is service sector. You know, it meets the demand that's generated by somebody else and delivers to service level agreements set by others. So I think rationalizing trip generation and optimizing those trips that are actually undertaken is big, a big issue, and that's probably starts with encouraging residents and organizations to think about sensible procurement. And ways of, you know, consolidation. Surprised we've got to 11:15 and consolidation's only been mentioned maybe once before. So I think that's really important. I think actually getting into people's heads and reminding them exactly what it is they're doing when they click a button to order online, and try to choose the more sensible and more sustainable options.
Okay, you're right. We have got to 11:15 already. So I think. Just to localise it a bit then to West London, would ask what are the challenges for the West London industrial sector in particular? I'll come back to you, Chris, and ask you about that. What in particular does West London face as a challenge?
I would have said access to land, access to premises,
yeah.
Access to, you know, reasonably priced workforce. I think we've kind of touched on all of those. When an operator is deciding where to base a site, it's partly to do with distance to the delivery area. It's also to do with stem mileage on the network, but it's also about locating close to a workforce that's affordable and available and skilled to the requirements that they need. So I think those are all challenges in terms of land, premises, and workforce.
Yes, obviously, yeah, that all makes sense. And Sarah, does that ring true? Is that the big issues that you're facing, challenges in terms of, you know, obviously you're very proud of the industrial development you have.
Absolutely. But land is expensive and difficult to come by, and turning land over from other land uses to industrial just in its street sense is just doesn't make financial sense. The other really important point is that skills point. So as part of the COVID recovery, we've seen so many people that have had to very quickly change and diversify, and logistics is one of those sectors that people have gone into. So there's a role here for the council, and that's what, you know, Hounslow are doing in providing the relevant training to get people in. And then as Chris has just said, you need to have the people in your borough. It's like a cyclical effect. The businesses will come if there's a critical mass of people who can sustainably get to the location where the jobs are being created. So I think that's the kind of council point of these people, thousands of people who have lost their jobs. There's an opportunity here to skill them up to the relevant levels to get them right into the job and to provide the business with what they need. Very pertinent for Hounslow at the moment.
And as Oliver said earlier, that a lot of it is around how people's attitude to the idea of working in logistics as well, or has been, and planning authorities' idea about what that means as a job. So is that changing, do you think?
I mean, it's absolutely changed, and I think the pandemic has really crystallized that for us. You know, we've got a jobs and skills team in Hounslow who are working tirelessly to capitalise on every opportunity there is. We've got, you know, a new green skills strategy as well, looking at, you know, how we can really match people up. So if it's one of those sectors that's on the forefront of sustainability and new ways of working, if we can match that with providing the skills necessary to do those jobs, then there's real benefits there.
Okay, thank you. And Ollie, coming to DPD, are there very specific challenges in West London that are being faced at the moment, different to elsewhere, or are they kind of the similar thing that you're seeing across the country?
I think anywhere in London, it's we've talked about the cost. I've mentioned the complexity as well, operationally, which adds cost. Obviously, when you're opening micro sites, with it, obviously with our growth, we employed an additional, well, thousands of people last year. It's a very successful industry. You know, it's one that people, you know, can easily get a job in, and it pays well in DPD as well. It's you know, it's a well paid position, but the staff isn't an issue. It's property access. I think there needs to be more collaboration between public and private. You know, when we're talking about the ULEZ zone, obviously is increasing in October. That proves challenges. Not so much for DPD because we have our compliant vehicles, but definitely smaller to medium-sized businesses could struggle. You know, so there needs to be more engagement, more communication, I think.
Was there anything you're seeing in the sort of once in a generation, most radical planning bill in 70 years that was kind of promised in the Queen's speech yesterday that's giving you hope as well, just to touch on that?
I don't think yesterday necessarily. I've seen in the last definitely 6 months, since sort of the Build Back Better was launched, you can see the momentum growing, the focus. My only concern is there's a lot of talk, and I want to see a lot more action, especially when it comes to charging infrastructure. You know, for us, that's the biggest concern. You know, we can purchase these vehicles, we can invest the millions that we're spending on these vehicles. But the fact is, if they can't get powered and can't turn a wheel the following day, we've got a problem. And I'd, you know, to quote Elvis, I'd like to see a little less conversation, a little more action. You know, because I just don't want to get to what I would call a Brexit moment where we get to 2029 and in the 11th hour, we still haven't quite made the right decision. I'm sure 100 odd years ago when we started using petrol engines, you know, we didn't talk this much of where a petrol station went and where, you know, it needs to be done. And money needs to be invested. In 5 years' time, we might look back and go, that wasn't quite the right solution at the time. But, you know, indecision is worse than making the wrong decision. You know, we need to move forward.
Great. Alison, coming to you there as well on the challenges you see in, well, I said London broadly, but West London.
Yeah, so I was just jotting a few things down, and definitely the right land in the right location. We talk about consolidation, and that can be on all these different scales, but actually securing that land and building it into existing properties or new developments when there's such a competition for the use of it is really difficult. And you know, I'm just trying to secure delivery and servicing plans, and actually a lot of the time people don't want to talk about that when they're going for a new build application. They'd rather talk about that later down the planning line, where actually if you're not thinking about it up front, you're not going to get the right solution. Me as the area manager for West London, I've got to we've got to run the network, and that includes buses and other traffic and just generally moving around and making sure it's safe. And how you do that with servicing and logistics is really, really tricky. So there's going to be some compromises there, and they're the biggest challenges we're going to, you know, it's going to be tricky. So
yeah, indeed. And Oliver, finally coming to you there. I mean, obviously we touched on a lot of the issues you'll have, but what are the challenges in West London?
Yeah, you know, land supply, just to echo what has been said previously, but, you know, one of the consequences of that is actually, you know, we have seen huge, you know, increases in rents for industrial space in West London, which on the one hand is great if you're an industrial developer and owner, but, you know, the reality is that businesses are getting pushed out, and we've seen that as a very common trend in recent years, where businesses in West and North London are moving to satellite towns along the M4 and up the M1. So that is happening, and I think will continue to happen. And as we've said, you know, West London has a huge population, and from a sustainability perspective, it makes perfect sense. You know, these facilities need to be close to that population to minimise the amounts of miles that are being travelled. But it is a very difficult conundrum, and we fully get it that, you know, there's huge pressure for land use in London, and the need for homes and in other uses is absolutely there. So there's no easy solutions. And
No.
I think what's interesting is the market itself might be making correction, because, you know, with those increases in rents and the appetite for industrial property, you've seen industrial land values increase massively. And actually, traditionally, it was, well, industrial land values are below these other uses, and therefore, inevitably, if the planning system allows, they will build out. And that's not actually the case anymore. You're seeing, you know, office, even residential sites in some cases going to industrial use, because that is the higher land value. So that's an interesting thing that's starting to happen. Starting to happen.
Yeah, obviously Prologis being seen sort of take up sites that we would traditionally, like a Stockley, that we would traditionally have thought of as office sites. So it's a huge change, isn't it? I noticed on the timer, I've got 3 minutes left, and I haven't asked any of the questions almost that were here, but most of them. So I thought just go very quickly around to ask everyone, what do you think is going to have the biggest impact on achieving net zero in the industrial and logistics sector? A final, you know, almost 1-2 word sentence answer. So I'll come to Sarah first.
Oh, that's not fair.
Oh no, sorry, I'll go somewhere else.
No, I'm fine. No, I think it's that collaboration and planning. So that real top level strategic, you've got to have the strategic plan, and I suppose the council is the place to have that, to put in the infrastructure in energy terms to make the decarbonisation possible.
Thank you very much. Come to Chris now.
What Sarah said. Basically, yeah, it's collaboration, partnership, working between public-private sector, and just stress that point about having a strategy and not jump into a single solution because it's the flavour of the month. Having a proper strategy, proper action plan, decent set of objectives and decent targets. Sorry, that's more than 2 words, but
no, I didn't mean. I didn't mean that. Just brief.
I think it was about 10.
Come to Alison as well here.
I think, yeah, collaboration's a top one, but I think TfL's got to listen and engage with you guys that are actively dealing with these issues, and it goes both ways, doesn't it?
Indeed. Oliver from Prologis.
Right. First of all, apologies. I'm not near an airport, but I'm in the West End, and Radio 1 Extra have just set up outside my window. So apologies if there's some background noise. But yeah, I'm going to cop out and agree on the collaboration point, because, you know, these are complex issues, and there's not one party, one stakeholder that can absolutely solve it together, and is working together to understand where we're experiencing blockages and constraints, and where there's opportunity to try and solve that, because I think the will is there from everyone, from what I'm seeing. So.
Okay, thanks. Ollie, finally.
Everyone's covered off really. It's about strategy, working together in partnership. But the one important thing I would state that I don't think any of us have touched on is timescales, and there needs to be a cut off, because we'll keep meeting, we'll keep talking. We need a proper plan from now until 2030 with a specific, you know, timeline, and what's going to be done when, what percentage of that is going to be done, so we can push on instead of leaving it, because there's so many people around the table, so many voices, everyone has different specific needs, and we could end up talking for quite a time. There needs to be a time limit on it. The clock's ticking.
Well, on that note, and referring back to Elvis, it's definitely time for me to leave the building, so I'm going to pass back to Bonnie now.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you so much to our speakers. I think industrial and logistics is probably the most exciting sector to discuss in the current time, or defining decade, to quote Ollie. But yeah, reinforcing that was a really exciting discussion, which probably could have carried on for at least another hour. So yeah, thank you all so much for taking part. Thank you to our Capital West London partners, in particular WSP, for supporting the combined West London boroughs in this programme and today's event. And finally, audience, thank you for joining us. If you're interested in learning more about moving around West London, its infrastructure and investment opportunities, we've actually got a virtual tour of the proposed West London Orbital Rail Line taking place next week, which is also supported by WSP. So if you'd like to join that, please get in touch with us via the emails that we've been sending out about this event, because yeah, it'd be great to have some more people joining that too. But yeah, thank you all again for coming. Thank you for your questions, and we'll look forward to seeing you at another event soon.